Well, officially, thank you very much for coming on out. I appreciate the fact that you've taken the time this evening to come on out and join us for this. Carleton University Department of Psychology, and we're doing our very first ever sort of success night where I'm going to go through sort of the idea of the secrets for success, and then my colleague Matt Sorley is going to take us through an exploration of the Department of Psychology program here at Carleton and kind of all the really important things that it would be really useful to know to be able to successfully navigate your way through the psychology program. So sort of two halves to our talk tonight. I'm going to do the first half, finishing up hopefully by 7 or shortly thereafter, or shortly before. I'll aim not to be late. And then we'll have a little 15-minute break, and then Matt Sorley will take over starting at 7:15, and he'll give you all the goods on the psych program. So I appreciate that you're here and sharing this talk. Otherwise, the chairs don't laugh at my jokes. I've tried, they don't. So I've titled this "Moving Towards Success." The idea is success is a journey and effort that we put in, and we'll talk about some of the secrets. What do we know? And in my discipline, psychology, I can't help but talk about some research results. So I'm not just making stuff up. I will actually talk about some research results that provide evidence to say, yeah, this works. This really does show to be an effective technique in the real world. So what are we talking about today? So in this particular half of the talk, we're going to talk about motivation. You're beginning your academic career. You're at the start of your journey on this really wonderful opportunity in life. It's a 4-year academic career, a 4-year journey through your bachelor's degree program. And that takes a lot of effort and a lot of time and a lot of commitment over those 4 years. And therefore, to sort of give us some fuel to fuel that, fire that motivation, we're going to really talk here at the beginning about the reasons why, the purposes for all of this stuff that we're going to do over the next 4 years. So I am going to invest some time in talking about the whys of the motivation. Why am I doing all this, and what's it for? So we'll talk about the real outcomes of a university degree, and we're going to connect those up to our future successes, future you out there in the real world after university. And then, of course, the bulk of our talk today are really to explore the secrets for being a successful student. And we're going to talk about a whole bunch of different topics, and I've kind of lumped them together into being successful in class and before class and also after class. And then things like motivation, successful planning or planning for success, memory, what do we know about how to maximize and be effective with memory, and I'll finish off by focusing on studying. Studying is such a weird process, and there's so many different ways and approaches to doing it, and we'll take a look at some ways that will help maximize our studying efforts, or better, we'll connect the effort to the outcome, right? Because you want to put in all this effort, and you don't want it to lead to no outcome, no change, so we want to make sure that your effort pays off. So we'll talk about some techniques. That's really the core of the first half of today's talk. So I want you to think of university as an opportunity. It's an opportunity to explore new ideas. It's an opportunity to explore new identities. It's an opportunity to meet new people. It's an opportunity to face new challenges. All kinds of new possibilities throughout your university career. But really, if we see the whole experience as just being an opportunity to be challenged and to explore ideas, we'll eventually, some way or another, find our passion that stimulates our motivation. And once you find your passion, the thing that you're geeky about, then essentially the work doesn't feel like work anymore. It just feels like the joy of learning. So, but on this idea of motivation, I want to talk about the connection between all this work that we do in university, all this work that we do to get our bachelor's degree, and our future life outcomes, because there is a connection. The stuff that we're doing is not purely random, although sometimes it may seem a little bit weird or somewhat random. There is a bigger picture involved, and I want to show you the bigger picture so that you can kind of contextualize all these tests and assignments and projects and presentations and readings that we ask you to do over the 4 years of your university career. So, 2 large surveys. Now, these are US-based, but they're not all that different from us. And so 2 large surveys that took a look at employers and what do they value in their employees. What does an employer value? And at some point in our future, we're all going to either be an employee or we will ourselves be an entrepreneur, an employer ourselves. So what are the things that are going to make us effective and successful as employees? What are the things that are going to help us to move successfully through our career in the future, and then we will tie those back to what we're doing here in university. So in these 2 large surveys, they're examining factors that influence the promotion or the firing, firing of employees. So first off, the employers identified the things that caused them to either have to discipline, reprimand, or fire an employee. And here are the top things that emerged from the employers in the States. The unethical behavior, so an employee's not able to recognize that, yeah, this is probably not the morally right thing to do in this context, so they're doing something unethical, and that gets them fired. Lack of work ethic, a lack of commitment. So they might be showing up, but they're just sitting around not doing anything. They're getting paid for the time, but just as if their presence is all that's expected. So lack of commitment to the job, lack of work ethic while they're on the job. Inappropriate use of technology, meaning that they are using technology that is owned by the employer and using it in ways that the employer hadn't intended, or during work, while they're at work, they're using their own technology to be off task while they're being paid to be on task. Failure to follow instructions. So employers, one of the things that led to being fired or disciplined was when an employer gives you a task to do, a job to do, here's what we need from you, and then the employee just wasn't capable of following that. Missing deadlines, late for work, right? These kinds of things employers really can't tolerate, so disciplined or fired. So on the flip side, let's talk about the positive. What are the skills that employers really valued? What are the skills that led to being promoted, to moving up that corporate ladder successfully? And if you're not going to be an employee and you're going to be an entrepreneur and you're going to be your own employer, these are all the same kinds of skills. What are the things that lead to being a successful entrepreneur? So the employers indicated they appreciated it when their employees had a balance between field-specific skills. So they had in-depth knowledge and in-depth skills within a specific domain. You really know one area, one field very well, i.e. like you're doing a major in university, but then balanced out with a broad range of knowledge and skills that you can think outside the box. You have different ways of thinking about the world and about problems and different sort of knowledge sets from different domains, i.e. During your bachelor's degree, you get asked to do breadth requirements where you have to take electives from other disciplines. So if you're in psychology, you do your major in psych, but then in psych, we ask you to take all these electives from other disciplines. Well, the employers are valuing this balance between a lot of depth in one area, but then also being able to understand the world from various different points of view. So more specifically, employers valued some skills. The ability to communicate orally, so the ability to express your knowledge and understanding to your clients, your customers, your coworkers, your teammates, to be able to summarize an idea to the team or to the employer. Ability to work effectively with others. So a group project where you actually have to be able to manage other people's egos and schedules and their strengths and their weaknesses. So working as a team, communicating in writing, being able to take information in and then express the results of that information, to summarize that in either long writing or short writing. Ethical judgment, tied to what we just talked about, being able to understand what's sort of the morally correct thing, the ethical thing to do within this situation. Critical thinking, being able to take in information. A lot of jobs require you to parse, distill a lot of different information, analyze that, be critical about that, be able to then understand the larger picture and the small details, and then of course communicate that either orally or in writing. And then the last one here, employers also valued being able to apply knowledge to real world problems, right? When we're working in the field, when we're working in some kind of organization, the organization has a mandate. They have a mission that they're working on, the product they got to sell, and employers appreciate when the employee can deal with those real world problems that the company is facing. Okay, so your degree is tied to that future success, right? We're bringing this all back to why are we engaging in all this work of a university degree? Your degree is directly tied to that, and let's explore how. For the university, we talk about learning outcomes. Believe it or not, we talk about learning outcomes, and we get very specific. We'll get learning outcomes for this project or this presentation, learning outcomes for this test material, but we'll also have learning outcomes for the course. Right at the end of the course, we hope our students are able to do these things. And then we have these what we call higher order learning expectations that are degree level outcomes. At the end of the degree, here are the things that we hope a graduate from our program is able to accomplish. And so our degree level expectations, one of them is, I'm going to put the first two up together because it's our breadth and our depth, which we just finished talking about. The employers indicate that they value this balance between exposure to one discipline in depth, that you do a major and you really understand the world from that perspective. You understand how we evaluate evidence, how we communicate the language in that discipline, that you understand some of the knowledge in that discipline. So you've got that in depth, that way of thinking about the world and thinking about problems. But they like that balance with the broad perspective, the ability to think from other disciplines and use other ways of constructing information and thinking about the world and bring those to bear as well. So that's that balance between the breadth and the depth. And then another higher order learning outcome, another degree level expectation, is this ability to think critically, to take all that information, break it down, distill it, make sense out of it, organize it, evaluate it, analyze it, and then communicate that in a variety of different ways to a variety of different targets, whether that's a client or a customer or your team or your boss. One of the other higher order learning outcomes is this ability to manage all these demands on your time. As a university student, you got a lot going on. You got family responsibilities, you got work responsibilities, you got to remember to pet the cat and feed the dog. You got to manage all of those tests and exams and assignments. There's so much to do. But the fact that you do it and get through it, you've been pushed, you've been challenged. Don't just manage this one project. Here, keep this goldfish alive, right? You're being asked to keep an entire farm alive. You're being asked to manage all of these different demands of your time. And by being challenged to do that, by being pushed to do that, you develop your capability to do that. And now the employer, at the other end of your degree, the employer is going, yeah, I see those letters after your name on your resume. That's what I want. I want that ability to handle those multiple demands. That makes a better employee. It also makes, if you're going to be your own business owner, it also makes you a better entrepreneur because business owners are busy. Showing motivation and commitment to your work. That ties into what we were talking about there, that to be able to get through your university degree, you had to be motivated, you had to be committed. Because if you're not motivated, you're not committed, you're just not going to get through. So at some point, you got to find your passion, you got to find the thing that makes you excited, and then all of a sudden the work doesn't feel like work and you'll be motivated to just do this. It's like playtime, it's motivational. Okay. The end takeaway point of this is that these broad expectations of the degree really map very nicely onto the things that employers themselves were saying we value. It makes you competitive in the job market, that you've got all these skills that you've been pushed, you've been challenged to do over your 4-year university career. Okay. I want you to think about this like going to the gym and getting a workout for your brain. There's my little brain lifting my little weights. It's the same kind of thing. This analogy works too well. It's too good. In some way, this experience of going to university is very similar to going to the gym. How's that, you say? Well, let's break it down. Number one, you're paying for the opportunity to work. You're paying for a gym membership. You're paying to come to school. And what are you doing at the gym? You're working. What are you doing at school? You're working. So similar. The harder you work, the smarter you work, the better your results. Right? You work hard and you work smart in the gym, the better your results. You work hard and you work smart at school, the better your results. You only grow when you're challenged. Right? If you went to the gym and you took a 1 pound weight and you're lifting your 1 pound weight, woo woo, right? 1,000 reps, I got 1,000 reps. A 1 pound weight, you're not doing anything with that. You're not pushing yourself, you're not challenging yourself, and so those muscles aren't gonna grow. And same thing for your brain. You're being pushed to parse and dissect greater information that gets more in depth and more detailed and make sense out of all that and communicate that critically to a target audience, sometimes in long form writing, sometimes in short form writing. But that challenge forces you to get better. You're getting pushed to do this. It forces you to get better at doing that. If you don't show up, you don't benefit. Why are you paying for that gym membership if you're not going to the gym? Cancel the membership. So you got to show up. You got to be there to get the benefit from the experience. And if you've been to the gym, you've seen these people. They're just there on their phone the whole time, texting away, right? Not lifting anything. And at the end of their hour of texting, then they go shower. What are you showering for? You haven't broken out in a sweat? So if you just stand around on your phone the entire time, you're not benefiting from the experience. And ditto if you're in your classroom. And I will acknowledge that for some courses, some classes, the professor has found a way to incorporate the use of the phone through some kind of response system or feedback system, and that's perfectly fine. But then there are other times where you're not using that response system, you're not using your phone to engage in that kind of response, and at that point then your phone's just a distraction, it's just in the way. So, university is a gym for your mind, and it's all about being challenged, pushing yourself to do more, pushing yourself to be better. It's only by pushing ourselves, challenging ourselves, that we actually do grow from the experience. Okay, so let's talk about the secrets for success. And it's confidential. No, it's not. It's not. No confidential here. I call these the secrets for success, but all this information is out there. So there's lots of information about success. Before I get into the very first one, I just want to point out that we'll talk about a lot of different ways that we can be successful as university students. Not every single idea, not every single thing works for all people. So you could kind of treat it like a buffet. When you go to a buffet, there's some things that you like, ooh, I'll have a double helping of this. And there's other things like, no, I'm going to skip that one. And that's okay. But a lot of ideas here, and hopefully there'll be some things that you'll really tune into and think about and take home and make use of. Okay. So we're going to begin by talking about being effective in class. When we sit down in the classroom, that's where a lot of communication is happening. That's where a lot of discussion is happening. That's a lot of information happening, and we want to be effective with our time. Right? You showed up here tonight. You're watching because you're hoping that you'll get something out of this that will pay off. You're hoping for a payoff. I could just come around and make it rain. But you're hoping that some idea here is going to help you to be more efficient. I could have titled this being efficient with your time. So let's talk about being effective in class. In class, what are we doing? Right? We're talking about our discipline. We're talking in the language of our discipline. So in psychology, we come to class and I'm speaking the language of psychology. I'm talking about terms and I'm using those terms, those ideas in examples, in context. And so I'm throwing out new terms, new terminology, and I'm explaining and I'm using them in examples. But there's a lot of terms, a lot of language, a lot of terminology. And if that's the very first time, right here in class right now, if this is the very first time you've ever heard this language, this term, then it can start to come pretty fast and furious. There's a lot of new information coming at you one right after the other. And so we're learning the language, and if we haven't done the readings before class, then that's a lot of information to take in during that 90-minute class period, or if you have a 3-hour class, during that 3-hour class period. Do the readings before class. You're going to do the reading at some point anyway. So if you're going to do the reading at some point anyway, you could do it before or after class. Right? By default, you're going to do it before or after class. One of those two. It's going to happen. If you do it after class, okay. But then what happened to class time? Class time, it's all brand new language. It's moving fast. It undermines your ability to take effective notes. Things are coming too quickly. And you don't know sort of where the gaps are in the textbook, right? So I'm talking about things that aren't in the textbook. Your professor is talking about things that aren't in the textbook, and talking about things that are in the textbook. And we get to point number 12, and hey, that was covered in the textbook, and I read it in the textbook and I understood it, so I don't need to furiously try to write down some of this because I understand this. And now when we got to that point number 12, you're thinking, oh yeah, yeah, I understand it. This makes sense. Yeah, I read that in the textbook. This works. I got this. Good job. And then we get to point number 13 out of the lecture, and maybe that wasn't in the textbook. But it wasn't in the textbook. And so now, this point, I got to make sure I take good notes here. Or point number 13, maybe it was in the textbook, and you're thinking, the way it was presented in the textbook, I couldn't wrap my head around it in my initial reading. But now here in class, the way the example is going, the way the language is going, now this makes sense. Now here for this point, I better take down this. So you know where to be more focused in your note-taking because you've done the readings before class. So readings before class, so we're not hearing it for the very first time during that conversation. And then when we're in class, we want to remove the distractors. So when we're in class, we want to get rid of those things that are taking us off focus. And yes, I definitely am talking about browsing Facebook on your laptop. I am talking about getting a text on your phone. There are times in class when you may be asked to use your phone to take part in some response system. That's perfect. But then if that's not currently going on, you may want to pack that away. Move it out of sight so it's not distracting you. So in class, we want to remove distractors. And then on top of that, Santa and colleagues did this really neat little study where they looked at being on task versus off task in a lecture. And here's what they found, because I've already made the point that if you're off task, let me make the point. If you're off task, you already know you're missing out on what's going on because you're texting. I didn't get that point. So I missed it. So that's the obvious part. But Santa and colleagues took a look at that, and they found that, yes, if you're on task and using your technology appropriately, then you're getting the benefit. And if you're off task, then you're missing. But this is what makes their study particularly inventive. They found that you can be on task. They found that you can be focused on what's going on. But if there's somebody in front of you who is off task, they're watching adorable cat videos, or surfing Facebook on their laptop in front of you, it creates what they refer to as a zone of distraction. So a zone of people in behind that individual who, even though they were trying to be focused on what's going on, they themselves were distracted by this person in front of them who was off task. So you want to remove those distractors. If you find someone who's doing that, you may consider moving seats so you're in front of that person. I wouldn't say go so far as to smack him on the back of the head, but maybe more polite just to move to a different location where you're not going to be distracted. And actually, the second part of that is don't be that person. Don't be that person who's distracting all the people behind you. So effective note-taking, we want to be effective at our note-taking. We have to think about what's being presented, and we want to paraphrase. We don't just want to type out exactly what's been said. And this stems from a study by Mueller and Oppenheimer. Not that Oppenheimer, the other Oppenheimer. That's a very dated joke. Mueller and Oppenheimer did a great little study looking at taking notes in class. And they let some students, or they assigned some students to take notes on their laptops. They had to take laptop notes. And they assigned some students to take notes with just a pen and paper. That's all they had was a pen and paper, no laptop. And they found that the students who had the laptops were better at taking notes. They took more extensive notes. They could transcribe what was being said, because you could type pretty fast. So they could almost type out word for word what was being said. They could almost type out word for word what was being said. Got it. The pencil and paper people, they couldn't write that quickly. So they weren't getting everything that was being said. Oh, no. That sounds like that's a problem. But wait. Now we get to the exam. So now on the exam, who does better on the exam? You know, if this was the laptop people, it wouldn't be exciting. What's really neat about this study was that they found that the pencil and paper people with the worst notes did better on the exam. What's really happening? What's happening here is the pencil and paper people, because they were slower at taking notes, they had to think about what was being said. What's the idea here that's being presented? And how am I going to capture that idea with my very slow handwriting? Right? I'm terrible at handwriting, so I'm very slow at hand. So how am I going to take in this idea and capture it in my notes, in my own words, given that I can't type out exactly what's being said? And so this is part of being an active listener, to think critically about the idea. What is it really about? What does it really mean? And then express that in your own words in your notes from class. Better than mindlessly copying it down. And of course, doing the reading in advance, very helpful with this. And then lastly, after class. So effective note-taking does not end when the class ends. One of the most efficient things that we can do is right after class ends, go back to the notes that we've taken and go back over them and fill in any gaps or errors or things that we missed, or elaborate a little bit more on a particular concept. Immediately after class, that's when all those things are fresh, right? I just finished hearing all those. We just finished talking about all those things. And that's the freshest it's going to get. After that, it's going to start to rot away like a cheese left out on the counter for a week. By the time you get a day later or several days later, you won't remember a lot of those nuances of the ideas that we just finished discussing in class. The best time to be most efficient with filling out and fleshing out your notes is immediately after class. So one of the best things you can do is make a plan to have a little bit of time after class just to go back. It typically doesn't take a lot of time because, again, efficient. Typically doesn't take a lot of time, but it's very easy to go back and fill in all those gaps and blanks and elaborate on some points. And then your class notes are significantly better than what they used to be if you didn't make the time for that. Okay, a little bit of carrot there. Let's talk about some motivation. So motivation is certainly connected to success. And for us to be motivated, one of the things we have to recognize is that what I do now has an impact on my future, right? My now impacts my future. And so if I give in now just to do something that feels good, like I'm going to rewatch an episode of Game of Thrones or something like that, because this is fun, and I'll do this now because that's what I want to do now. Or, oh, this kitten video is so adorable, and look, there's another, and look, there's another. That feels good now, but I'm not accomplishing any work in this moment. And future me, tomorrow me, next week me, has to make up for that time that I didn't get done now. So we have to make this connection between my efforts now and what I'm going to have to do later. And part of this is to avoid those mental traps. Now, we all engage in these mental traps of, I don't really feel like writing my paper now. And I'll be more motivated later. I'll be more into this later. I'll be in the right frame of mind later. Nuh-uh, no you ain't. you're not going to be motivated and in the frame of mind of, ooh, I'm really excited about writing my paper. That's not going to happen later. Future you is not going to be any more excited. Future you is going to be panicked. I've got to write this paper now. Past me, you jerk, right? Like this mental trap that we often tell ourselves really is just us lying to ourselves at the expense of our future self. So we have to we have to recognize that mental trap that, I'm gonna be more motivated later. I work better under pressure. No, my colleague Tim Pitchell often says it's not that you work better under pressure, it's that you only work under pressure. Meaning that if you don't have that looming deadline right over you, you can't be bothered to do it. So now you is just screwing over future you. And you don't. As someone who's evaluated thousands of papers, I can tell the ones that were written the night before. Right? It looks as if you wrote it while you were being chased by a bear. I can tell the ones that didn't have any editing, that they didn't have time to go back and craft a better sentence, or they were doing it just seconds before the deadline passed, and they had to click save and then send to get it in before the assignment submission link shut down. So avoid those mental traps. And then part of this motivation is we want to set goals. So here's my objective, here's my goal, and we'll talk a little bit more about goal setting. But then we also want to reward our successes. So hey, I've accomplished my goal, and so I can have some kind of reward. And it could be something as simple as a cookie. Nobody says no to a good cookie. But it could also be, hey, it's Friday night, all my friends want to go out. I'm going to say, I'm going to accomplish this chunk of studying first. And once I've achieved my goal, then my reward will be I will come join you later. So, they're going to still be out partying, and now you'll be, a half chapter further in your readings, more prepared for the exam, and you'll still be able to catch up with them in good time. Your goals, though, should be manageable. You don't want to set up a goal that leads you to a failure. You want a goal that is achievable. And we'll discuss that a little bit more in a sec. But part of this is you want your goals to be objective-based, not time-based. An objective-based goal says, what are you doing later tonight? Later tonight, you're going to read the first half of chapter 1. That's a manageable goal. I'm going to read half a chapter. I'm going to read 15 pages. If you set up a goal for what are you doing later tonight, and your goal says, I'm going to read 2 chapters later tonight, you're not going to do it. Your eyes might do it, but your brain is not going to do it. Right? Your brain's not going to successfully distill and take in 2 chapters in one sitting. It's not a manageable goal. But if you set a manageable goal of these 15 pages, this half of a chapter, that's something that you can accomplish. And then a break. But let's break that down and get into some planning for this. How do we plan for this? So number one, you got to schedule time. I often use the work analogy. While we're in university, we work a lot of shift work type jobs. I worked a ton of shift work jobs while I was in university. And for shift work, your boss schedules a shift. You show up, you work your job. If the boss didn't schedule a shift, you don't show up. Hey, why are you here sweeping the floors, right? You're not scheduled to work. I just love sweeping, right? You don't show up to work when you're not scheduled to work. So the same thing with studying, right? You got to book it into your calendar. You've got to plan for that like a work shift. Studying shift, just like a work shift. So book that into your calendar, and then picking up on what we were just talking about, distributed studying, break it down into smaller chunks spread out over time, as opposed to massed studying, where I'm going to try to get through 2 chapters in one sitting. Maybe I'll make sure I've got a long enough shift that I can get through the 2 chapters, but that's still mentally exhausting. You would be far better off over 4 nights to do a half a chapter per night for 4 nights than on one night to try and cram your way through 2 chapters. The mass studying just overloads the brain. You're not going to really be taking in all that information. Distributed studying means you come back to the material in smaller chunks over and over again, giving your brain time to let it settle in. Have a plan, have an agenda. Right? So, but keep it manageable. We're picking up on what I was talking about. If you set yourself an unrealistic goal, you're setting yourself up for failure. So you want to have a plan where you've got these shifts booked, you know what's coming up, you know when you're going to accomplish which portions of your studying and when you're going to work on which projects. All that's booked out in your calendar, and keep all of that manageable, in manageable chunks. Not, I'm going to write an entire paper on Saturday. Because halfway through Saturday, your brain is going to be crying, like, why are you doing this to me? Stop it. Remove distractors. This is specifically for studying. In your studying space, you want to make sure that there aren't things that are breaking your train of thought. As you're studying, you're taking complex ideas that interweave back and forth with each other, and you're breaking them down and building them back up. And as you're doing all of that construction of these mental ideas, that takes sort of a lot of mental focus. And then all of a sudden, in the middle of that, mom texts you, sup. And now all of a sudden, all that mental effort that you had done to build all that up, sorry, what was in that text, Ma? And now you got to start all over again. That's not being efficient with your time. So while you're there doing it, make sure that you're not being distracted, things that aren't taking you out of your focus. This ties to the Pomodoro technique. The Pomodoro technique is named after these pasta timers, these little tomato-shaped Pomodoro pasta timers. And it's essentially using a timer. You could actually, there's an app for that. There's an app for the Pomodoro technique. And essentially the idea here is, and we will combine this with what I just finished talking about, set an objective-based study goal. I'm going to read this half of this chapter. So that's your goal. I'm going to read this half of this chapter. And then how do you do it? You do it in 25-minute chunks. So you set your Pomodoro timer for 25 minutes. For 25 minutes, you are on task. You are focused, no distractors. You are nose to the grindstone, working on getting that goal accomplished. At the end of each 25-minute period, when the timer goes off, ding, your pasta's ready. At the end of that 25 minutes, when your timer goes off, you get a 5-minute break. Give your brain a rest. Adorable kitten videos approved. For 5 minutes, but that's also under a timer. Not 6 minutes, 5 minutes. At the end of that 5-minute brain break, you're back in the next 25 minutes. You repeat this 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off until you accomplish your objective-based goal. We don't set time-based goals, right? I'm going to study for an hour. But what does that do? It rewards us for just kind of sitting there for an hour. At the end of that hour, I've studied for an hour. But what have you really accomplished? Right? Well, I got half a page read. So you want to set study-based goals, but the Pomodoro technique is going to help you get through that in an efficient manner. I really should rename all this just being efficient. All right, memory. What do we know about memory? How are we going to maximize memory? Well, big topic here, elaborative rehearsal, and I'll just put the whole thing up, and deep processing all together. These two things go hand in hand. They work together. We're going to explore this in a little bit more detail. So elaboration just means to add additional detail. We expand, we elaborate, we tell bigger stories. So in elaborative rehearsal, I'm rehearsing. It's as if someone gave you a phone number, 555-1234, 555-1234, 555-1234. Pure rote memory, pure just maintenance rehearsal is just to repeat it over and over and over again. 555-1234. And so you just keep repeating, but you don't try to understand the meaning of this information. What does this really mean? In elaborative rehearsal, we expand on the ideas, we break them down, build them up, we tell stories, we generate examples. With rehearsal with these additional details, where we tell greater and deeper stories, facilitates our understanding. Now we know this in a little bit more detail, a little bit more depth, and it aids the brain's process of consolidation as we're trying to consolidate this idea into our memory. Now, tied to this idea is deep processing. Deep processing, where we're processing this material deep into our understanding, is essentially integrating this new chunk of information with what we already know. You already know a lot, particularly in the domain of psychology. You have a lifetime of interacting with other people, observing them, analyzing them. You do. And now, as we're going through, particularly in the field of psychology, and learning more about people, this new information fits with what we already know, or it doesn't. And in deep processing, we're going to take this information and squirrel it away into what we already know, elaborate on what we already know. Or if it turns out that this new information maybe contradicts something that I thought before, right, we have to reconcile that. Maybe we have to adjust the way we previously viewed the universe, the way we previously viewed human nature and human behavior, adjust that to incorporate this new knowledge. When you really do this well, your exams become a joke. You get to laugh at your exams. If you've really done deep processing well, then all that information from the textbook, from the lecture material, becomes just the way I think about the world, right? All that textbook, lecture material, all that information becomes just the way I understand the universe around me. And now I get in on the exam, and the exam's asking me not about some information that's in the textbook. The exam is asking me some information about the way I think about the universe. And now that exam's not a challenge anymore, because it's just asking me about the way I understand how the world works. I won't leave you with just that. Let's get a little bit more specific. We'll break this down. So first up, elaboration. And actually, let me do the first two, because they go hand in hand. In elaboration, we're asking how this new concept connects with other concepts. So we're telling stories and we're expanding, but we're also building those bridges of connection to other ideas and concepts that we know. And this includes our prior knowledge, our pre-existing knowledge, but this elaboration also includes taking a new piece of information and reconciling it with the other new information that I'm also getting in that course, in that class, from that textbook as well. Now, similar to this, tied to this, connected to this, is distinctiveness. As we're thinking about these connections between ideas, we also want to think about how these things are unique from each other. It's not just studying what something is. It's also studying what something is not. As an example, in intro psych, one of the concepts that we'll eventually get around to is the concept of a reinforcer. And there's two types of reinforcer. There's a primary reinforcer and a secondary reinforcer. And you'll read about those, and we'll talk about those in class. And we won't talk about them right now. But when you get to that point, and you're learning about a reinforcer and a primary and a secondary, as you're learning those, you want to think, okay, well, they're both reinforcers. So they both do something together that makes them each a reinforcer. So they share something in common. What's that commonality that makes them both a reinforcer? But why is one a primary, one's a secondary? What's the difference? What separates them? How would I understand the difference between a primary and a secondary? How would I recognize that in an example, the difference between a primary and a secondary? And you want to do that every time you run into information. Not only study and understand what it is, but also study and understand what it is not. Where's the limit of a concept? Personal. One of the best ways to achieve deep learning, to really get that stuff to sink in, is to make it personal. Psychology is an amazing discipline for this, because psychology is all about us. And so we can often make this very personal. And that helps facilitate our understanding. When it's about me and I understand, oh yeah, this is something about me and this is how this works. So relating it to personal experience can really help us facilitate that deep learning process. And the last part of this is to practice in ways that are relevant to how we're going to be tested. So how are we going to be expected to use this concept or apply this concept? And however I'm going to use or apply this concept, I would like to practice in a similar manner. If I'm going to be asked to write an essay about this concept, then I may want to practice writing long-form responses. If I'm going to be asked to fill out multiple choice questions, then I actually might want to practice in a way where I maybe generate some sample multiple choice questions and generate all those right and wrong answers as well, so that I understand what makes an answer right, what makes an answer incorrect for any of the questions that I've generated. Okay, what to do while studying. So now you're studying, what are you going to do? And we'll explore a few of the general tips, and I'm going to get deeper into one specific sort of conceptualization of studying. And then we'll finish with a big picture. We'll have a big takeaway point at the end. So what to do while studying. And we start off with, okay, well, while reading, one of the things that we want to do as we're going through the textbook, stop at the end of each paragraph. The textbook is a lot of information, paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. And if you're kind of skimming along, kind of moving along, and you didn't sort of understand a little section, but you keep moving forward, often what happens in a textbook is we continue to build ideas as we move from paragraph to paragraph, and continue to build and elaborate and expand and add new dimensions. And if you kind of missed a point or didn't fully understand a point in an earlier paragraph, that's just going to exponentially expand the lack of understanding. You know, I have a gap here in what I was learning, and now all the subsequent stuff isn't making sense either. So stop at the end of each paragraph and ask, what is the idea being presented? Can you summarize this concept in your own words? And then tied to this is taking notes. Taking your own sort of study notes while you're reading is significantly more effective than just pure rereading. Right? I read the textbook, I'm going to read the textbook again. It turns out that a pure rereading isn't really an efficient use of your time. I really should have titled this slide, or this talk, Being Efficient. You're much more efficient and effective if you take your own study notes while you were reading, and then you can come back and play with those ideas a little bit later. Similar to what we said before, while studying, you want to make these connections, connect the new information with what you already know. And then, of course, what you get in on the exam is going to be asking you about the way you understand the world, the universe, and people. So I talked about that point already. Another thing you want to do while you're studying is generate your own examples. A lot of times we like to ask applied questions, right? How does this apply in the real world? What would this look like in the real world? So as you're studying and learning these ideas, you want to ask, well, how does this apply to the real world? And start generating examples, because the act of doing that will not only help you understand the definition, but it'll also help you to recognize applications and examples when you eventually get to those questions on the exam. Generate your own practice questions. A very frustrating thing to have to do. Generating, particularly multiple choice. Essay questions are easier to create, but harder to answer. Multiple choice questions are really hard to create, but as a studying technique, they're a very effective studying technique. You write the question and you write the correct answer. Not too challenging so far, but the really meaningful, impactful part of generating your own practice questions for multiple choice is the wrong answers, generating the other wrong answers. We call them distractors, because you have to understand why this question is leading you to this correct answer, and then you have to understand why these other responses are incorrect. So you have to be able to generate plausible, realistic looking, potentially looking like they could be an answers that are illegitimate, they have some fatal flaw that makes them not actually an answer to this question. So those distractors can't just be nonsense, right? You know, which of the following is blah, 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 and then answer A is clearly correct, and then answer B is kittens, and answer C is puppies, and right, you can't just create nonsense answers. They have to be really plausible looking answers, and that's challenging to do well. But the act of doing that really preps you very well for writing exams. And then, of course, mix up your studying techniques. You really want to mix up your methods and not rely on a single studying technique to get all this done. So reading, writing, talk it out, have a study buddy. Engage in a debate, a conversation. And if you don't have a study buddy, even just orally talking and just speaking, alone in your room. I sometimes practice lecture to my cats. Just they're an audience. I mean, they're not entertained. They don't laugh at my jokes either. But they're at least someone I can talk it out to. Flashcards, rhymes, songs, stories, flowcharts, graphs. You want to mix up your studying techniques. Don't rely on just a single technique, because one technique will not be useful under all possible styles of knowledge. So, the SQ4R method. You've probably heard of this. It's very famous. What does it stand for? Survey, question, and then 4 R's. Read, recite, reflect, and review. The SQ4R method. And it turns out that this method, easy to remember, is going to summarize a lot of what we talked about. So, survey. In the SQ4R method, the first one, survey, what they want you to do, the suggestion here, is start with, say, the table of contents for this chapter. Skim through the headings. Get an idea of what the big picture is. What is this chapter about? Just based on only reading the headings. So you're kind of skimming through, only reading the headings. What are the different topics that we're going to talk about? How are they related to each other? And then turning this into questions. So how are these different topics related to each other? What do they mean? As you read through the different headings, turn them into questions. And then ask yourself a question, okay, well, one heading is short-term memory. The next heading is long-term memory. So we could turn those into questions. So what do we mean by short-term memory? What do we mean by long-term memory? And what might make them similar or different concepts from each other? Okay, they're both types of memory. What does that mean? One's short, one's long. How do we define those? And then down to the meat and potatoes. The nuts and bolts. You got to read. So the first R is you got to read through the material and pick up on the point I talked about earlier. Stop at the end of each paragraph. Make sense out of what you've been reading. Don't allow yourself to keep going forward if you're not understanding. If you're not understanding, if you're stuck on something, go back and struggle through it, push through it, break it down line by line, sentence by sentence, word by word, to make sure that you get all of those ideas pulled out of the textbook presentation, the paragraph that you're struggling with. And then the second R is to recite. This is where you're going to write out your own study notes. This has to be in your own words. You have to be paraphrasing. Do not just write out the textbook or the lecture material. Don't write it out. Don't copy it. That's a total waste of time. You are way more effective when you write it out in your own words. You're paraphrasing. It's a very active form of studying. Copying is unbelievably passive. You could turn your brain off. You don't need a brain to copy, right? You just get a photocopier. It doesn't need a brain. You don't need a brain to copy. You need a brain to paraphrase and put it in your own words. The third one is reflect. This is where you get to do a little bit of playing. Play with the ideas. Generate your examples. What's the meaning of this? How might I apply this? How might I use this? What's the nature of this idea? Where are the limits of this idea? Where does this idea stop and the next idea start? And the last one here, to review. So in our SQ4R method, the review is once we've done all this work, we've played around, we've written our own notes, we've generated our examples, we've thought all of this through. Now we go back and we reflect on, well, what did I just learn? What was this all about? What's the big picture? What's the big takeaway point from all of this? So skim back over all that chapter and the study notes, and it's an opportunity to sort of think big picture. And maybe try to wrap it all up or sum it all up with some kind of final big thought. Fear. I'm right on time. I'm doing perfect. Fear. We're talking about fear. We're talking about being an effective student. Being a successful student, we have to talk about fear. Because fear often prevents us from being our best self, achieving all of our possibilities. So I have to talk about fear when we're talking about being a successful student. Often we feel like we are going to be ridiculed, or we're going to look like a fool if we ask a question. And never be afraid to ask questions, because that's how we test our knowledge and our understandings, and that's how we grow by challenging the way we think. You're never the only person who has questions. There always are other people who are equally paralyzed by fear, just terrified of asking a question. So you're not the only one who has those questions. Ask questions in class, before class, after class, during office hours, by email, all the time, anywhere, everywhere. And then part of fear is also we hold back from making connections with our classmates. We hold back from getting a study buddy. I talk to so many students one-on-one who lament they wish they had a study buddy, someone I could study with. And I'm constantly saying, yes, you're not alone. There are other people. You just need to reach out, because there are other people who are equally excited about that possibility. Study with your classmates, learn from them, ask them questions, hear their answers. When they ask you a question you have to explain, you are learning by having to explain. When you ask them a question and you have to listen to their answer, you are benefiting from their perspective, their knowledge, their way of thinking, their phrasing of the idea. And now for the big takeaway point. So to wrap all of this up, that was a lot of information. And to wrap all of this up, I really want to just give one really big takeaway point that hopefully will summarize a whole lot of what we've talked about, really just into one big kind of graphic. So being a successful student, being successful, what are the key ingredients? Well, number one is time. We talked about motivation, we talked about commitment, we talked about work ethic. So there is going to be time. Time plus effort, which is getting washed out, so you can barely read the word effort. Time plus effort. We have to put in that effort. Not merely showing up, right? But showing up and exercising your brain. You got to put in the time, but not just standing around. You got to exercise your brain. You got to challenge yourself and push yourself. But time and effort alone don't necessarily lead to success. We also need to employ effective techniques. That last one says effective techniques. On my computer, it's good contrast. Here, it's really getting washed out, so it's not good contrast. Time plus effort plus effective techniques. And we've talked about a whole bunch of different ideas for being effective and efficient with your time. And all three of those together lead to success. If you commit your time, you get motivated to put in the effort, and you make a point of finding some efficient techniques that will make you successful, then a success is definitely something that's possible. And that is the end of our time. I'm right on time. Yes. Thanks. So we'll do a short break, and then Matt Sorley is going to come and talk about how to navigate your way through a 4-year psychology degree. If you're not a psych major, or you just don't know you're a psych major yet, stick around, because you may learn something that applies to your own program as well, or you may at some point realize I should have been a psych major, and then this will be really relevant too. So we'll take a bit of a break, and then Matt will come and do the second talk. Thanks.